Welcome to Humble Ground, a podcast where the heart of agriculture meets the stories that feed the world. Behind every meal is a farmer, a rancher, and a legacy of hard work. Here, we shine a light on their journeys, their challenges, and their triumphs, because every meal has a story, and it's time we heard it.
Hey everybody, welcome to the next episode of Humble Ground. I believe this is our 10th episode. Hopefully I'm not wrong on that, but pretty excited. The guy that we're going to talk to, Craig Polson, I've known for a long time, got a great story, passionate about agriculture as a veteran. We got a lot of things in the works, and so I said, man, can you come on and join us? The biggest thing that you can do is check out our website, check out the previous episodes. We try to have a really good variety. We try to not only talk about how things are grown in terms of crops and cattle, but also just real life stories. And Craig's is going to be an interesting story I'm pretty excited about. So check out the website, subscribe. But without further ado, Craig, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you. It's a privilege to have a chance to talk to you.
Yeah. So did you grow up around farming? What do you remember as a kid, what that was like back then?
Yeah. My dad, he grew up a mile into Nemaha County, just 3 miles from here. And his dad was a cattleman and farmer. And his dad and brother had Polson Cattle Company. And this was back in the Depression. They were getting hundreds of head of cattle into Vermilion, and they would drive them with all the neighbors and would help drive the cattle up the road, put them in the timber, feed them all winter, scooping silage, take them back to Vermilion, take them to Kansas City. So he had grown up around cattle and farming, and then he always farmed. Went to K-State and then got his ag economy degree or economics degree, and had been farming. So I'd been around it from as early as they'd trust me to drive something.
So when you were a kid, did you help out? Did you help sort cattle? Did you help, all the things?
Little. By the time I got to be 12 or 13, I could help a little. When you got a lot of cattle, little kids in a feed yard, not the safest thing. So my dad had a hired man that helped him all the time. His name was Lester Palm. Still lives just a couple miles west of here, and he worked with my dad up until I got back from the Navy, and so yeah, it goes back a long ways there.
Yeah, a few years, anyways. Yeah. Did you, when you were 12, 13, is that something that you really found a passion in, or did you help out because Dad told you had to?
Probably more just I helped because I had to help. It wasn't really my long-term plan at that point, when you're 12 or 13 and you have other interests and things. But I always enjoyed living out here on the farm, and, neighbors and friends would come out and want to spend the night out here when they were in town. And so it was good living on a farm, and I enjoyed having the freedom to explore the creeks and things. So, as far as watching things grow, for me, it was like, okay, I've got to go cut all the weeds in that field. And so not the most enjoyable, work. And when you could start driving tractors, that was a lot more fun. And I had a few years of that before I left.
Yeah.
So
I was reading an article recently about the first piece of ground, not that you bought, but you getting into farming. So your dad had obviously been around it. Mm-hmm. Tell me the story about, what were you, 15 or so, when the neighbor reached out to you?
Yeah. A guy named Leland Chapman lived on this farm. And Leland had gotten cancer, and he farmed right at that time. He owned the ground between here and where I was growing up, a mile west. And so he came over one time, and we knew he was sick. And he came over and asked if I'd be interested in renting his land. I'm 15, and I've got nothing but, I had no equipment, nothing. And anyway, I remember the conversation because I don't know if Dad knew he was coming. I'll never know that. But he asked if I'd be interested in renting this farm. And of course, I thought, well, that's pretty neat. I don't have any friends 15 years old that are really doing it. So I said, yeah, and Dad said he'd let me use his equipment. And so that was kind of the start. I was a sophomore in high school, and that was kind of the intro, And then that kind of tripped the trigger. Then all of a sudden, I wasn't just doing somebody else's stuff; I was doing my own. So that changed things.
That would change perspective a little bit on life. So after that, did you say I'm gonna get graduate high school and go into agronomy, or what was your plan?
Well,
leaving high school,
I kind of enjoyed school. I was a pretty good student, but I was tired of school, and I wanted to do something different.
Sure.
And we had a gentleman in our church that was a recruiter for the Naval Academy in Annapolis, and he was trying to recruit me to the academy, and he had 3 sons that had all gone through the academy. And, it was patriotism. It was something exciting to do. And my dad had wanted to go into the military and didn't pass his physical, so wasn't able to go. And not that pushed me, but I just felt like, I'd like to do this. And but 10 years was too much. And if you go into Annapolis, that's a 10-year commitment. So it was September the 18th of 72, been out of high school just a few months, and I enlisted in the Navy. And then 3 weeks later, I was at Great Lakes, Illinois. And I was 17, had my birthday in boot camp, which I told nobody. That was, didn't need anybody
Leave that
to know
detail
that
out, yeah.
But yeah, I was really young, but everything was exciting and new. And so my dad had to take care of this farm at that time. And he had bought the other, well, later on, I guess it was, but then we'll get into that. But yeah, so he took care of it. And then I went into the Navy at that point and got sent on a ship, and, the rest was history. I we went to Vietnam, and then we got back in January of 74. And at that point, I had one more year to do in the Navy before I could come home. And then I got an early out. At that time, I'm rabbit trailing a little here.
No, you're good.
At that time, if you were going into a major university and you were accepted and you could start, they would give you a 90-day release, and you could get out 90 days earlier than your regular
Interesting.
Discharge date.
Yeah.
So I had contacted Kansas State, and I had some friends from high school who were already there. Of course, they were ahead of me, and they said they'd give me an early out. So my dad flew to Los Angeles. I picked him up in my car. We drove back straight through on a Wednesday, 30-some hours. I enrolled on a Thursday, and I started classes on Friday, and that was the 5th day of classes. They barely let me in because the semester was underway. And so there I was, walking around the university with a map, trying to find out where my classes were. But that was the start. And then I went to K-State then at that point, off and on, farming and shifting, and it worked. It worked out.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about your Navy days, because you and I had met. We're talking about an ag documentary with veterans, or mini docs, or there's a lot of things when you get into documentary world, planning and all this kind of stuff. And not to rabbit trail anything, but a quick backstory: you and Thad Lambrick. Thad has been a buddy of mine for a long time, and you guys have been friends, which I didn't know until there's a nursing home across from my house, and I saw Thad's truck parked there. This was a couple of months ago, I don't know. And
yeah, I remember.
So I walk over there and I'm like, "What are you doing in Centralia, Kansas?" And he's like, he goes, "Me and Craig Polson are going to go see an old gentleman in the home that's like 101 or something." Yeah. And I said, "Okay, I got a lot of questions about how you guys met, but whatever." And we're sitting there the whole time because he's like, "Well, he's a veteran and loves just talking about that and telling stories." And I said, "Man, he farms too, doesn't he?" He goes, "Oh yeah, or he used to." And I said, "Man, what a story. Serving the country in that way and then coming and serving the country in a different way would be incredible." He's like, "Why don't you reach out to him?" And I said, "I'm going to." So we had lunch, and I said, "You want to be on the podcast, and we'll figure the rest out." And so that's how we got here. But one of the intriguing things that I had found at lunch, I guess, tell everybody how you bought your first piece of ground, because I think that story is probably one of the most unique things I've ever heard.
Well, it was kind of funny. We were overseas at the time, and the people that had taken the farm, that owned the farm, and we were renting it, of course, at that time, they had decided to sell it. And there was 160 here and 120 tied to it. And my dad had contacted me through letters, or what letters took like 10 days, 2 weeks. You could send a telegraph, but that was slow too. And he said, "They're going to sell that farm." And I said, and correspondence, how are they going to do it? He said, "Well, they're going to do it sealed bid." And I thought, well, that's a real curveball. What do you pay for a farm? This is 1973. And so we talked about a number to submit, and we did, and submitted my bid. And then he told me about a week later, he says, you've got the farm. And then he had in turn bought the 120 that ties to it. So that's how I got my first piece of ground. And I'd been farming it at that point for about 4 years, I guess, 3-4 years. So yeah, that's how I got the first one, was here.
And you bought it on
a seal bid.
out in the ocean.
Yeah, out in the Tonkin Gulf, off the coast of Vietnam, I bought a farm. It was kind of funny, but it worked out. It was just interesting how it worked.
What was like? You send that off, and then you have to wait. I would assume, a week or something to hear back.
Yeah, it was at least a week or 10 days before I knew. I mean, we had to have it in early, and then they collected all their bids, and I never knew if maybe I didn't have the very top bid, but since I had farmed it and taken care of it, and
Sure.
I had kind of befriended Leland, the gentleman that owned it, and he had given me his Brittany dog and a pair of Longhorns that he had in his house, and we got to be good friends while I was farming it, and I don't know. I don't know if I had the best bid. He had passed away by that time, of course. And so, I ended up with it. So,
what a story to tell.
That was here. Yeah.
Yeah. Your first acres.
Yeah.
So you come back and you go to K-State. What was the plan then?
They had a program where you did a certain amount of years of active duty and then you finished it in the reserves.
Okay.
So I was still active in the reserves when I went to college to start. And then a little later I did get out. And then about a year later, I re-enlisted, and then re-enlisted numerous times until I retired.
Sure.
But anyway, as far as K-State went, when I started, it was January of 1975, so it was the second semester. So I had a good semester, learning everything. And then the next year, I went the full year, fall and spring, I was driving back and forth all the time from here, and it's about 53 or 4 miles. So harvest and all that stuff. Well, then the next year, I thought fall is too hard to do. So I sat out fall and went spring, and that worked better, but it's pushing my degree down the road. And then the next year I sat out fall and went spring, and of course I was loading up hours. So when I go back, I had to get permission from the dean I took 21 hours one semester, 23 one semester to get done. And then the last year I'd pushed every class I could to be able to get done, and I had fall offered classes only, so I had to go fall and spring my last year. And I graduated with the exact number of hours I had to have, but I had my degree done. And so then I graduated in 79 from K-State and had my
It only took a little longer than planned, but
yeah,
you got her done.
It stretched out over some years and crazy amount of hours in driving, but it all worked. I had it done. Yeah.
It's Thomas, one of the first ones we had. He was trying to go to K-State and run a dairy. And he's like, man, and I was driving. I was like, man, I can't imagine trying to make that work. And then you think about, farming, it's like, how would you even make it all fit?
Yeah, you get to a weekend and it rains. Now what? So
when you had graduated, is that something, where were you at land-wise? Was that, you were still helping Dad and had a little bit of your own, or what was that?
I owned the quarter. I was helping him, and he was sharing me with I had a little interest in some of the other. And then that fall that I graduated, I bought another 80, and in 79. And of course, we know what 1980 and 81 and 2, things really shifted, and the embargo hit, and my ground was worth half of what it was 3 years after I bought it, 2.5 years after I bought it. And anyway, I wasn't married yet. I got out of K-State, and I got a trailer house. My grandparents had a trailer, $5,000 trailer, and I drug it over here with a 40-20 and a ball hitch, and we set the trailer house right here. It was 70 feet long. And so I had a house on my own land. It was a big deal to me.
That's living.
It was a trailer house, but it was good. And I wasn't married yet then. I got married in 83. We can get into that later. But we lived in that house from 79 until 87. So anyway, that was it. So at that point, I had bought a second piece of land, and another neighbor had that. And I had rented it for a little while before I bought it. So then that was the second piece of ground I tried to, and of course things were going south fast, and you're trying to hold everything together. So that's when I decided I've got to do other things, revenue streams, as you mentioned.
Sure.
And so I started a crop insurance business. My dad had been doing a little bit of that, and so I kind of grabbed his business. He wanted to get out of that, so at that point I was an agent for a company. And then it was kind of the first commercial pheasant hunting business that I knew of anywhere around. Nobody was doing that. And we had about 1,400 acres that was all pretty much contiguous, so I could release birds. We had a lot of wild birds too, of course, but as the season went on, my clients came from New Mexico, Florida, Chicago, nobody local. I'd been doing that probably 7-8 years before anybody even knew I was doing it, and then we became a controlled shooting area, which let us shoot different, hens, roosters, set limit, and my out-of-state hunters could hunt for a fee instead of paying an out-of-state license. So that was good. So the pheasant hunting, without going into that too much more, that went on from 79 until 2007.
Wow.
So we did that a lot of years. And kids helped with that. Linda was very involved with feeding hunters and, cleaning birds. And I'd be up at 4 a.m. kicking birds out and doing all that. And, it was good. It was good. Met some wonderful, wonderful people over the years.
I think it's interesting, when we were talking a little bit before we started, revenue streams, because I think now, honestly, is super similar back to the 80s in terms of things are going to get tight. It might be a good time to figure out another revenue stream or how to change up things just so you can get through. Was that in the 80s? Do you see that being super similar to now? Obviously, you're out of day-to-day farming, but does it seem really similar to you, those two time periods, or is it?
In a way, it was a lot more labor intensive. It seems. I mean, when we went to a 12-row planter, that was kind of a big deal. We were farming quite a bit of ground, but just to be able to go out and plant a quarter section or more in a day was a lot. So that shifted, and having extra labor. We got 5 kids, and I didn't get married until 83, so we didn't have anybody able to work. About the time we could start getting some help out of the kids. I mean, they're in high school, they're busy with stuff, and so you're still pretty much being in school and helping Dad on the farm didn't coordinate real well. Sure. So it still was just requiring a lot to do, and we can get into that in a minute. But we kept going. Made it all work, and lost my dad in 2002, which really changed things up. Yeah. And so all of a sudden it was just me on all of it. And did that for 6 years until I realized I can't keep doing this. I really enjoyed listening to Galen Ackerman's podcast you did with him and hearing about the struggles he had. And mine weren't maybe as severe, but I knew that if I kept doing what I was doing, I couldn't do that. Sure. So made big shifts, shut down the pheasant hunting business, shut down the crop insurance business. I had to sell my business to somebody because I was going to be a crop adjuster. I took my agronomy degree and I started working for a company as a crop adjuster. And so that was good. I started that in 2008, rented all my land out, sold all my equipment piece by piece myself. I didn't do anything through an auction. I just tractor house in a few places, and I sold everything privately. A tractor went to New Mexico, and a combine went to Oklahoma State. And anyway, got rid of all the equipment, and then went to work for RCIS, Rural Community Insurance Services, and there's a number of agents in the area here. And I started training other adjusters as well as being their crop hail guy, because I liked the physiology and morphology of crop damage more than just how many bushels did you raise. Yeah. That bored me. Interesting. But, get me in a field that's all beat up and let's see how bad it is. That's what I like to do. And to have a farmer gain his trust. And, since I'd been on both sides of that combine window, I knew what he's thinking. And I knew that how crops would respond. And sometimes it didn't always work just like the books would say. And you'd follow all that procedure, but you just kind of knew, well, it depends on what happens after this storm. And so a lot of times we would defer, come back in and look at it again and bring other people. I always had somebody riding with me, learning the craft, and it takes time to learn that. So I did that. I just finally retired from that last February permanently. Wow. I did it full-time for about 13 years with them, and then I stepped away and thought, I'm done, And then one of the guys that I had actually trained and worked with for a number of years was a regional guy for another company. And he said, would you help us a little bit if we get problem claims or we get a blowout or whatever? And I said, yeah, okay. So I did that for 4 years, part-time as a contract adjuster. And then last February, he called me to renew my contract. And I said, I got grandkids now. I got a shop. I like to cut rocks. I like to make toys. It's time. So I stepped away. So that's
But I think that's, so being able to step away is a big thing. And I think in your farm, you were able to step away. When you could have probably done it for longer and you just would have burnt yourself out and got to a point where it probably wouldn't have been good.
I was burned out. I was just.
So it's good that you can step away. And it sounded like your kids, none of them had a real passion to come back and farm. So
Linda and I were just talking about this yesterday or last night. We had at least 2 kids in college at the same time for I think about 8 years. Just the way my kids were staggered. Yeah. So I shut this all down with 2 kids at K-State. It's like my neighbors probably thought, oh, you're crazy. But, we were selling equipment. We were doing things, and we weathered, a little different going to work for somebody else But, it all worked out, and I just saw God's hand in all of it because, when that window opened, I thought, well, this is something I can do, and I liked it.
But you still got to stay involved in agriculture.
We still kept our land. Yeah. We rented the land to my cousins, and they farmed all of it for me, and they're wonderful farmers.
So you're still involved in it in a way.
Yeah, I still
that's
have.
Awesome then.
Yeah. We have everything we need. The land's here, and I still get to drive semi trucks, and my cousins have my same name. So I said, how often can you go jock 3 different semi trucks and they've got your name on the door and you don't have to buy the fuel?
Especially with what fuel costs, yeah.
Yeah. So it's been good, and I do get to help them in the fall. That's about the extent of what I do, though. But I've got some equipment yet, and kind of do some of the conservation stuff here, and been able to keep my hand in it and keep my land. Which is what I wanted to do.
When you were just coming out of the Navy, did you have plans of, I'm going to do this, and we're going to grow to this, and my kids are going to take over? Was that ever a thought that because that would have been not at a great time? So was that a thing where it was like, I'm going to farm and just see what it's like and then try to grow? Or did you have a plan back then of what the future looked like?
I always said I had a passion for farming, and I did enjoy farming pretty well, but it kind of wasn't my end game. I kind of always thought I was going to want to do something else.
Yeah.
I love teaching, and I taught in the Navy part of the time as an instructor and taught instructors, and I always liked that. And when I had a chance to, when the step away happened, I mean, I've heard about people that leave the farm and it's just devastating. But I didn't have to leave. I mean, I was still here, shifted gears totally,
right.
But really felt like I got to pursue something new. And my kids didn't have a passion to farm, and they saw the work I was having to do. They weren't seeing me, and I think I didn't push them at all. I let them do whatever, and none of them really said, I'd really like to come back and farm, Dad. Never heard that word. And they helped some, of course, as they could. But no, I didn't push them there, and I'm really glad now. There's been some really good times in the last 10 or 15 years, but my kids all have good jobs. They're in solid jobs, totally independent, taking care of themselves, and I'm good.
Yeah, and again, you can still be involved as much as you want to, and driving a grain truck, and you don't have to make all the decisions. And
the farm is here. They can always come back, and I don't know what they'll do with it down the road. That'll be their choice, but I hope they decide, whatever, if they want to keep it or move it. But it's been a great home for us.
Yeah. Did your dad farm up until he'd passed?
Yeah.
He did?
Yeah. Well, he was in the legislature for 4 terms, so that took a lot of his time. So he was gone during that time, but he was still really involved with a lot of it, And we ran a chemical business out of his place for 8 years. We were selling farm chemical.
Yep.
And so he always kind of had his toe in other things too. He served on lots of boards, and that's a passion that hit me, and had a chance to work with some state and national boards.
I was going to bring that up. It seems like you've traveled quite a bit in the name of agriculture, I guess.
Yeah.
And so tell us a little bit about you're serving on that kind of in that area of agriculture.
Yeah, it was about, I think, 1988 maybe. Governor Hayden appointed me to the Grain Sorghum Commission. And the grain commissions in Kansas, what they do is they allocate how the checkoff dollars are spent for research. So we were tied into K-State funding research and different companies that were working with primarily grain sorghum at that time. So I got on that commission and had been there a couple years and was able to get on the International Grains Program Advisory Board at K-State, and did that for 3 years. And then through the Grain Sorghum Commission, there's what's called the U.S. Feed Grains Council. It's now called the U.S. Grains Council. But they were doing international market expansion all over the world, many, many projects everywhere. And so when I got seated on their board of directors, then I had a chance to really get involved with foreign trade. And I loved that, got to go to Washington too much, It was a struggle, and we'll talk about when I got married and probably all the stress that my wife had to put up with. But, between the Navy and the travel, there was one year I was gone about 150 days, and I was trying to take care of this place, and she was running the show to keep it all together, really was. But, the mission, we take trade missions. We went to the Soviet Union in 90. And, we were on 13 flights in 14 days going from country to country to country, meeting with their directors of marketing and all this stuff. And you've got to kind of be careful. And I just noticed, you start thinking you're really important. And you just have to recheck and realize that, If you're not here, somebody else will have your job Friday, and in about 2 weeks, they won't know you were ever here. But it was important work, and I loved it, and we got to travel to many countries in the East Bloc, and then took a trip to Venezuela once, and Japan, and you're doing hearings before Senate Ag and whatever, in Washington, and trade people. But it was fun seeing those projects, and it really does help agriculture to push grain. And we had, just a little side thing, we had a project in Egypt where we were trying to teach them how to, they feed water buffalo like we'd feed cattle. Maybe not as much now, but they did then. And they feed them lousy rations, and it takes forever to get an animal big enough to slaughter. So you buy the cattle, you have a country director that sits in there and watches everything. You set up the rations, you give them the grain, you give them the supplements, you run that pen of cattle through, and they're amazed at how fast they put the weight on. You're putting 2, 3, 4 pounds, 3 pounds a day on some cattle when they were maybe getting a pound before. And so then they realize, oh, we can buy U.S. sorghum, and we can import it, and we can get these cattle fat quick. So those are the kind of projects we were working with, but you have to do it all. But once they see it, then, that's part of what the job was to introduce and implement, and then see the follow through. So that was really, really neat to watch that happen. I really enjoyed seeing those projects.
That's pretty wild. And I think, speaking of your wife, we talk about this all the time. Galen and I talked about this. Without a good wife, especially in ag, what people don't understand that aren't around agriculture is it's such a family thing. It is such the wife helps, and maybe that's helps drive a grain cart, or maybe that's helped bring food out to the thing.
Sure.
It is such a family-oriented thing, and there are times of the year that the only time you probably see your spouse or your kids, or depending on how the family dynamic is at the farm, is if you're getting the tractor with them. And that could be for, like this year where we didn't have any rain. There's probably some families that didn't see their other, I bet they didn't have a family meal unless it was on the side of a farm for 2 months.
Oh, I would agree. Yeah, and it was that way.
And that's just what it takes. And I think it takes special people to understand that when the time comes, that's just kind of how it is. So then you make the moments that you can in other times of the year, or again, at the side of the field, and that's the normal for that time of year. What's your favorite memory of all time farming?
I might have to think about that and come back.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Finding out that you owned a piece of ground was a big deal.
I bet.
Or seeing something change, This isn't really farm related now, but I had a chance to build a pond over here a few years ago, and, stock it, and just see that you could go in and just change the topography of the land and make a piece of ground that maybe didn't have a lot of purpose all of a sudden be a wonderful place for kids to fish, and a dock, and things you can do, and that's fun. But farming, I think, always just the last day of harvest was always a big deal, and I guess just sometimes just driving around in an evening when it's calm and the beans are waist high in a year when it didn't dry up and burn up, and you see things good, and you start figuring in your head, okay, now next year what are we doing? So planning and like that was, I guess that's enjoyable.
How do you deal with the bad years in farming? I think a lot of people don't talk about that, the fact that, whether that be the 80s, whether that be now, whether that be whatever.
Yeah.
There's good years and there's bad years.
Yeah. Some people say there's tough years and then there's worse years. It's gotten to be such a high dollar game. I kind of shifted out at a time when things were really shifting. And that was part of my trigger, because in 2008, the GPS stuff was coming in. I still had a foamer on my sprayer. I wasn't GPS yet. And I was going to have to really scale up equipment and trade combines and do a lot of stuff. And things have just, the last 25 years has been phenomenal. But that was a big decision for me that helped me, because if I would have stayed, or if any one of my kids would have wanted to stay, I don't know if we'd have had it put together here. I've seen, and sadly, I've known people who dad mortgaged his farm so that the son could buy ground that now's worth 20 times what it was when I bought my first farm. Yep. And, I look at that and think all of a sudden it caves and the whole thing falls. And now dad's in trouble. And the kids that want to farm, their family's in trouble because they were dependent on that. And I guess the way that we slept at night was that, I diversified with other things. I wasn't raising cattle. I had told myself that I wasn't going to raise livestock, and I was around them a lot growing up, but I said I'd rather chase dogs than hogs. So that's why I started my hunting business. And my brother-in-law helped me start that in '79, and then he left in '85, and then I had it until '08. But we had that business going, we had the crop insurance business going, and other things.
So at least you knew in the bad years that at least
you had something. You had something, because grain prices were all over the board, and those early '80s. We God rest his soul, but Mr. Carter just got buried a week ago, and that just about killed agriculture when he was president, because of what had happened to the embargoes, and we all know about those, and it was horrible, and good man. I won't say that he wasn't.
Sure.
Probably didn't have a real eye of what it was going to do to agriculture.
Yeah.
And that stems into everything.
And I think a lot of people don't understand how agriculture is what the 1% feeding the 99% or whatever the analogy is.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
you want to talk about how ag plays into so much stuff. It's insane. And so I love to see people. I love to see young people coming back to the farm. I hope there's a really good plan as to how that's going to work, and the rising costs of things, and if they have to get again a job to make it work for a while, I get it. But we're going to have people coming back to the farm. We're going to have people interested in agriculture to continue, because feeding the world's not an easy job.
Yeah.
And
well, we were just talking about this last night. Lynn and I were at my cousin's house and talking about how few couples on a farm now, mom raises the kids and isn't working off the farm. And even back when we got married in 1983, Linda was raised on a farm in Illinois. And she was on a traveling singing team, and I met her at a concert in Minneapolis, of all places. And, great story.
It's weird how the world works,
married over my head, and got a wonderful woman who was able to let me chase a lot of dreams.
Yeah.
But, I think back about how that all kind of worked out, and you just had to figure out ways to make it work. And we did. We moved from that trailer house to a house in Axtell for 10 years, and then built this house in '97. And this was a trailer house here at one time, and I look at that, and that's something. And I have to say, the farm did that for me.
Yeah.
And a lot of work. She worked hard. I worked hard. Raised our kids, and but back talking about just. The way a lot of people make it is the wife. Most cases, it's the wife has a job in town that has the insurance for the family.
Sure.
Because I remember what our health insurance was costing us, and it was crazy. And if you worked for a job that covered that, it was a big deal. So we were very blessed to Linda's a great mom, and she raised all of our kids, and I think it's made a lot of difference in their lives. And I think they'd tell you, that it was good.
No, It's awesome. A couple more questions, and like I said, I can't thank you enough for coming on. I really want to talk about when I had mentioned, hey, I want to do a documentary, or at least talk about it. Again, there's a lot of logistical things, a lot of things. I said I want to do a documentary about veterans and ag, and somebody that served, and somebody that now is serving the country in a different way. And you were incredibly open to being involved with it, and so I'm excited to do that, and that's a shameless plug about that. But we haven't got a whole lot figured out yet, but we're definitely figuring things out. I've talked to a bunch of filmmakers. I've talked to people on we had an ag finance company reach out that is all veteran owned.
Oh, really?
And it was like, hey, we want to be a part of this whenever you figure out how that all works. And so we're trying to figure that out and where it would go and all that kind of stuff. But how neat is it to know that you served the country in two different ways, in two very, very different ways, in two very big ways. Like, how cool is that to know you served the country in the military and also, grew crops for? Yeah.
Well, I have a lot of pride in the fact that I was able to serve in the Navy for that length of time, and it's still close to me. I've been able to reconnect through internet sites, and I found some of the guys I served with on the ship way long ago. Which is really cool, and we can talk about things. And we're all, I haven't seen those guys, a lot of them, for 40 some years. But I'm really happy to see, the fact that I think it's changing too. I feel a real swell of patriotism in the country.
Yep.
And it didn't just happen since the election, but it's really speeded up since the election. And I'm just excited to see enlistments are happening again, and there was a lot of time that I really wouldn't have encouraged people to look into the military because it was going south, so bad. But I'm proud of that time. I'm proud of the fact that I was able to have land and change it in good ways. I hope leave it better than I got it. I hope, and that's land is a one-time deal. We talk about topsoil. Linda's parents lived in Illinois, and where they farmed, I'd see tilers, putting in tile, and they're digging 4 or 5 feet deep, and it's just as black as coal at the bottom. And here we get down about 2 inches, and it starts to change color. So we have to be really careful. Our ground's really fragile here, and not that they don't need to care for it there too, but we've got to do things right, or we lose it. And so we don't plow anymore. We don't do a lot of things, and you hope that through the time that you had the land, and we're just stewards of it. We just it's going to be somebody else's someday, much as we think we're going to keep it forever. No, we're not. But you try to leave it at least as good as you found it, and hopefully better. And I think we've done that. It's been fun to, soil conservation award, things like that. But I mean, not that that's a big deal, but somebody else recognized, hey, they stopped erosion on this farm and they put in tile outlets and did it on their own dime and got this all handled. And that to me means a lot. No. And so I guess I take a lot of pride in the fact that this place is, when people come here and the side of the road's all mowed and looks nice, I want people to know when they get to Linda and my farm, that we try to keep it nice,
It's a beautiful place.
Yeah, well, thanks.
And it's awesome, the conservation. Like I said, I was reading your articles. The fact that, you want to leave it as good as you can, because, realistically, as great as it is to say that that's going to be your piece of ground for forever, statistically speaking, that's probably not the case.
Yeah.
And so, why not make it as best as you can, or not do things to ruin it in the process?
Yeah.
Because you've only got it for a certain amount of time, so why not?
Yeah.
Why not make the best of it?
Yeah.
But anything else you want to talk about?
I don't know, other than I'm really thankful for my wife. The fact that she helped put this all together. I never would have been able to do it without her. And she tolerated a lot of me chasing dreams and being gone. And now we're kind of I just turned 70 last November, and I'm 9 years older than she is. So, it's she reminds me of that once in a while. We can't average. I thought if we could just average, I'd gain about 5 years. But no, I'm just really thankful for how everything just worked out, and I've stumbled. I've made mistakes. But, God in his sovereignty, I think sometimes just says, okay, I'm going to give you about this much rope, and when it gets tight, you're going to realize you're going down the wrong road. And, Linda's always been supportive of everything I wanted to do. And there's probably times she thought, why do you need to go there? Or do you, can't you be here? And you try to do both, and something has to suffer. No matter how much you want to think you can do 2, 3, 4, 5 things, something has to suffer, and she picked up all that slack. So I'm very thankful for her. And we've got a great family. I'm just thankful that my kids have been successful, and whether it's because of me or in spite of me or because of their mom, probably. Just really thankful for that. And I want to thank you for having this opportunity to share a little of my story. It's not totally unique by any means, but it's my story. And
I love it.
I'm anxious to live out the rest of it. I still get to be out here and be active doing whatever, and I hope I can for a while.
No, I think you are. You've had so many different life experiences in agriculture in different ways, shapes, and forms, and you're still involved in agriculture. Yeah, you're not farming, and that's fine. Yeah. I mean, I think people have to understand too that, again, if there's not a next generation that's wanting to come back and farm, don't kill yourself trying to do it.
Well, we all need to know when to step out of the way.
Yeah.
For me, it was a little abbreviated because of some circumstances, but, nobody can do this forever. And too many people hang on too long. And the next generation has to grab a hold of this and make it roll. And they will. It'll all get farmed. You think, well, who's going to farm all this? And you start hearing about this $6,000, $7,000 or 8,000 acre operations, and it gets done. And used to be, getting 80 acres planted in a day was a big day. Now that's done by 9:00, or before. It's really changed, but it's been fun to just watch the ride. What's happened since I was born in 1954. I'm an Eisenhower kid, and to watch what's happened between then and now. And I just think, can there ever be that big of a change? My dad, when he was born, they were still farming with horses, and went all the way to, where it was, GPS and all that stuff. And I've got a neighbor south here that's 98, I think. I think he's 98, 97, 98. And thinking what he's seen in his lifetime. It just has to boggle your mind, Carry a computer in our pocket and everything is there.
But I think it's awesome to see. We get to travel and see so many. I was just in California last week for an ag tech company, and the first autonomous plane essentially is what it is. Spray plane.
Oh, okay.
Wild.
Wow.
And we get to see so much stuff that, again, if you think looking back, one of the podcasts that I really enjoyed was Joel Knopf. Joel really dove into the history of his family farm and all this kind of stuff, and they brought him in on the railroad and dropped him off and said, figure it out, and they failed completely the first year.
Wow.
And they went to the bank and said, we're not doing this, and they're like, try again. Like, nobody else is making it work either, so keep trying. And you think about people back then and say, man, if you could have tell them that, hey, X amount of years we're going to have drones and we're going to have all of this tech stuff, I mean,
isn't it crazy?
It is. But I think if farming's going to succeed in the future, it has to evolve like everything else does. And so it's really fun to watch some of the advancements being made.
It is. And
again, I think you're getting less labor that's coming back to the farm.
Yes.
And so you have to make do with less. And I think technology and equipment's getting bigger, and I think that's just going to kind of be how it's going to continually grow. And
I would agree.
I guess we'll see how it goes. But I want to thank you a bunch just for putting up with me, if nothing else.
It's been good. Enjoyed it.
And look forward to the future. But for everybody watching, thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned for the next episodes. We've got a bunch coming up, a bunch of really cool ones that we're excited to show. Check out the website, subscribe, share it with your friends. And as always, we'll catch you next time.